Hey guys, tonight we're settling into a warm Saturday morning memory, the kind that smells like fresh cut grass and old cardboard boxes sitting out on a driveway. We're talking about what a 1960s American garage sale was really like, back when a folding table and a hand-painted sign were enough to turn an ordinary front yard into a small neighborhood event. Before we get into it, I want to say thank you to the viewer who suggested this one. You always seem to know exactly the kind of quiet, forgotten corner of American life that belongs on this channel, and I'm grateful you took the time to share it. If you're new here, consider sticking around, and if this kind of thing brings you comfort, like or a comment always means more than you would think, and if you would rather listen than watch, this channel is now on Spotify as well, so if that suits your evening better, you will find the link waiting in the description. Now go ahead and get yourself settled. Dim the lights if it is night time where you are, or let the sun in if it is morning. Turn on a fan for that soft hum in the background. Pull the blanket up. Get comfortable, because we are not moving for a while. What did it actually feel like to walk up someone's driveway on a Saturday morning in 1962? What did the folding table smell like? Sun-warmed metal and old paperback pages. What did people talk about while they sorted through someone else's old dishes and toys? Did anyone ever haggle over a quarter, and did it always feel a little bit like theatre? What did the coffee can full of a loose change sound like when someone dropped in a dime? And just like that, it is a Saturday morning in 1962. The dew is still on the lawn. Somewhere down the block, someone is dragging a card table out of a garage, and the day is just getting started. It begins the evening before anyone even steps outside. In the fading light of a Friday evening, the garage door creaks open, and the quiet work of preparation gets underway. Boxes come down from high shelves, blankets get shaken out on the lawn, and old toys get pulled from closets where they had been resting for years. There is a particular kind of stillness to this work, unhurried, almost reverent, as families decide what stays and what finally gets to leave the house. The light outside has that soft amber quality that only comes in the last hour before dark, the kind that makes even a cluttered garage look almost golden. You can hear the scrape of cardboard against concrete, the soft thud of something heavy being set down on the driveway, the occasional laugh when someone unearths a toy they had completely forgotten they owned. There is no rush to any of it. This is not a chore being endured. It is something closer to a small ceremony, a family quietly sorting through years of its own history. Inside the garage, the air smells like sawdust and old motor oil, mixed faintly with the sweetness of dust that has settled undisturbed for months. A single bulb overhead casts long shadows across stacked boxes, some labelled in careful handwriting, others simply marked with a question mark because nobody quite remembers what is inside anymore. You reach for one of these boxes, feeling the soft give of the cardboard under your fingers, and pull back the flaps to find a stack of dishes wrapped in yellowed newspaper, each one a small time capsule from some holiday long past. Somewhere nearby, a father grunts as he hauls out an old bookshelf, setting it down with more care than its condition probably deserves. A mother kneels over a pile of children's clothes, holding up a tiny sweater to the fading light, deciding whether it holds enough memory to keep or whether it is finally time to let it go. These decisions are made quietly, without much discussion, the kind of unspoken agreement that comes from years of sharing a home together. The blankets get shaken out on the lawn first, the ones that will serve as makeshift tablecloths for tomorrow's display. Dust rises into the evening air, catching the last bit of sunlight before drifting back down into the grass. You smooth the fabric flat, weighing down the corners with anything heavy enough to keep the evening breeze from lifting them. It is the kind of small, practical task that feels satisfying in a way that is hard to explain. the simple pleasure of preparing for something, even something as ordinary as tomorrow's sale. As the sky deepens into a dusky blue, someone switches on the garage light, and the work continues under its steady glow. There is a rhythm to it now. Boxes opened, contents assessed, some items set aside for the tables, and others quietly return to their place on the shelf. Every so often, someone pauses over something unexpected. A photograph tucked inside an old shoebox, a child's drawing folded between the pages of a forgotten magazine, and the sorting slows for just a moment while the discovery is admired. By the time full dark settles over the neighbourhood, the driveway is already half arranged. Tables leaning against the garage wall waiting to be set up right in the morning. Boxes stacked neatly by category. A small mountain of the family's own history waiting patiently for daylight. The air has cooled slightly, carrying with it the faint smell of someone's dinner cooking a few houses down, mixing strangely with the cardboard and dust still clinging to your clothes. There is something quietly moving about this moment, the evening before, when the sale is still just potential, still just possibility. Nothing has been priced yet. Nothing has been picked over by strangers. For now, it all still belongs entirely to the family that gathered it, each object carrying its own small history that only they would recognize. Tomorrow it will become something else, a set of transactions, a morning of quiet commerce. But tonight, in the fading light of the garage, it is still simply a family's life, laid out gently under a bare bulb, waiting for one more evening before it changes hands. You close the garage door part way, leaving just enough space for tomorrow's early light to slip through, and head back inside, the scent of cardboard still lingering faintly on your hands. It is the kind of quiet, unremarkable evening that would be easy to forget, except for the fact that tomorrow it will become something the whole neighbourhood shares in, if only for a few hours. Down at the corner of the street, someone kneels over a piece of cardboard with a paintbrush and a can of leftover house paint. The letters come out uneven, a little too big at first, then smaller as the space runs out. Garage sale, it reads, with an arrow pointing the way. This sign will be taped to a stop sign or nailed loosely to a telephone pole, and by morning it will have already done its quiet work of pulling strangers toward a stranger's driveway. The paint is whatever happens to be left over from some earlier project, a half-empty can of white trim paint perhaps, or the leftover blue from the shutters 2 summers back. It does not matter what colour, only that there is enough to get the message across. You dip the brush carefully, watching it soak up more paint than you intended, and press it to the cardboard with a kind of careful concentration usually reserved for something far more important than this. The first letter comes out a little too large, crowding the ones that follow, and you can already tell the word will need to shrink to fit by the time you reach the end. There is no ruler involved, no careful measuring, just an instinctive sense of space that gets recalibrated with every letter. By the time you reach the final E, the paint has thinned slightly on the brush, and the letters taper down into something almost delicate compared to where they began. The arrow gets added last, a confident diagonal stroke meant to guide strangers around the corner and down the block. It is not elegant. It does not need to be. Its entire purpose is to be seen from a moving car, legible enough at 20 miles an hour to catch someone's attention and plant the idea that a stop might be worth making. You let it dry on the driveway, propped against the garage door, the paint fumes mixing faintly with the cool evening air. There is something satisfying about watching it set, the letters holding their shape, the whole sign becoming solid and permanent enough to survive a night outside and whatever weather the morning might bring. It feels almost like a small act of faith. This cardboard rectangle destined to hang from a stop sign or get nailed loosely to a telephone pole, trusting that it alone will be enough to draw people who have never met you toward your driveway. Once it is dry enough to move, you carry it carefully down the block, the paint still faintly tacky at the edges. The telephone pole you choose has been used for this exact purpose, more times than anyone could count. Small nail holes dotting its surface like a quiet history of neighbourhood sales long past. You find a bare spot and tap in a single nail, letting the sign swing slightly in the evening breeze, catching what little streetlight there is. Standing back to look at it, you feel a small flicker of anticipation, the kind that comes before any event whose success depends entirely on strangers. Will anyone even notice it? Will the arrow be clear enough? Will the letters hold up if it rains overnight? These are small worries, almost silly in their scale, but they carry real weight in the moment, because tomorrow's whole morning depends on this single piece of cardboard doing its job. Other signs already exist further down the street, weathered from past sales, some barely legible anymore, their ink faded from months in the sun. Yours stands out among them, fresh and a little crooked, a new addition to the neighbourhood's ongoing conversation about what everyone no longer needs. It is a strange thing, this small ritual of cardboard and paint, but it carries real meaning, marking a home as open, if only for a few hours, to whoever happens to be driving by. As you walk back toward the house, you glance over your shoulder once more, checking that the sign is still hanging straight, still catching the last bit of evening light. There is something almost hopeful about it, this simple hand-painted announcement that tomorrow, for a little while, your driveway will belong to the whole neighbourhood. Before the sun is even fully up, folding tables get dragged out from the garage and set up in rows across the driveway. Card tables borrowed from the kitchen sit beside sawhorses topped with old plywood. Someone's father grumbles good-naturedly about his aching back while carrying out a heavier piece. The tables wobble slightly on the uneven concrete and nobody minds. This is not about perfection. This is about getting everything out where the light can reach it. The morning air still carries the coolness of night, and your breath is faintly visible as you carry the first table out from the garage, its metal legs cold to the touch. You set it down carefully, testing its balance against the slight slope of the driveway, adjusting one leg with a folded piece of cardboard until it sits reasonably level. It is not a science, this arrangement, more a matter of instinct built from years of doing it before. The card table from the kitchen comes next, its familiar checkered surface looking strangely out of place outdoors, more accustomed to holiday dinners than to holding someone else's old belongings. You unfold its legs with a practiced snap, the same motion your hands have made 100 times before, and set it beside the first table, close enough that the two surfaces nearly touch. Somewhere behind you the sawhorses come out next, their wooden frames a little worn from years of use, some project or another always leaving its mark on the surface. A sheet of old plywood gets laid across the top, wide enough to hold the larger items, the furniture and appliances too heavy for a folding table to manage gracefully. The whole arrangement starts to take shape, a patchwork of surfaces that somehow, despite their mismatched heights and materials, comes together into something that looks intentional. Your father's voice carries from somewhere near the garage a familiar complaint about his back, the same one you've heard every year this sale happens, delivered with just enough humour to make clear he does not really mind. He hauls out a heavier dresser drawer unit, setting it down at the edge of the driveway with a soft grunt, wiping his forehead even though the morning air is still cool enough to see your breath. The tables wobble slightly as more weight gets added to them, a gentle rocking that settles once enough items are distributed evenly across the surface. Nobody bothers to fix this properly. A slight wobble has never stopped a sale before, and it is not about to start now. What matters is getting everything positioned where the growing morning light can reach it, where a passing car might catch a glimpse of colour or shape interesting enough to make them slow down. You step back for a moment, watching the driveway transform from an ordinary morning scene into something resembling a small marketplace. The tables stretch in an uneven row from the garage door toward the street, each one a little different in height, in material, in age, but together forming a kind of makeshift storefront that will soon draw strangers up your driveway. The concrete beneath your feet still holds the last bit of the night's coolness, and you can feel it seeping faintly through your shoes as you move between the tables, adjusting their spacing, making sure there is enough room to walk comfortably between them. Somewhere down the street a dog barks once, the sound carrying easily in the still morning air, and a light switches on in a neighbour's window, another household stirring awake to another Saturday. By the time the last table is in place, the sky has shifted from its deep pre-dawn blue into something softer, hints of pink beginning to touch the edges of the clouds. The whole driveway waits now, tables arranged, surfaces bare, ready for the items that will soon fill them. There is a particular satisfaction in this moment, the setup complete but the sale not yet begun, everything poised on the edge of possibility. You glance toward the garage one more time, knowing there is still plenty left to bring out, but for now you allow yourself a small pause, standing in the quiet morning light surrounded by tables that will soon hold pieces of your family's history, waiting patiently for the day to properly begin. Sitting at the edge of the cash table is a coffee can, dented slightly at the rim, filled with quarters, dimes, and a few crumpled dollar bills left over from last week's grocery run. This is the entire banking system of the morning. No register, no calculator, just a can and a piece of paper with prices scrawled in pencil. Someone's mother keeps a close eye on it from her lawn chair, counting under her breath every so often just to be sure. The can itself has clearly seen years of use for this exact purpose, its label long since peeled away, replaced by a faint ring of rust along the bottom edge where moisture has gathered over time. It sits slightly off-centre on the card table, weighted down enough by its contents that a stray breeze has no chance of tipping it over. Beside it rests a small notepad, its pages filled with quick pencil calculations, the kind of simple arithmetic that requires no more than a moment's thought. Your mother settles into her lawn chair with the practiced comfort of someone who's done this every year, a cardigan draped over her shoulders against the lingering morning chill, her eyes drifting occasionally toward the can even as she chats with a neighbour who's wandered over early. There is a rhythm to her attention, a habit built from experience, checking without seeming to check, trusting the honesty of the morning while still keeping a careful watch. The first transaction of the day arrives quietly, a young man holding up a stack of records asking the price with genuine curiosity, rather than any attempt to haggle. Your mother glances at the pencil-marked tag, states the amount and watches as he digs through his pocket for the right combination of coins. The sound of change dropping into the can carries a small, satisfying clink, the first note in what will become a familiar rhythm throughout the morning. There is something almost old-fashioned about this system, even by the standards of the day, a level of trust built into every transaction that feels increasingly rare in other parts of life. Nobody asks for a receipt. Nobody double-checks the change being handed back. The entire operation runs on the quiet assumption that everyone here is being fair, that the numbers scrawled on masking tape represent a genuine agreement between two people who have never met and likely never will again. As the morning wears on, the can grows heavier, its contents shifting with a soft rattle whenever your mother reaches in to make change for a larger bill. She counts quietly under her breath, fingers moving through the coins with practiced ease, never seeming rushed even as a small line forms of people waiting to pay. There is patience built into this process, a willingness to let the morning move at its own unhurried pace rather than forcing any kind of efficiency onto what is, at its core, a fairly relaxed social occasion. Every so often, a customer offers slightly more than the asking price, rounding up out of simple generosity, and your mother accepts the difference with a small grateful nod, tucking it into the can without comment. Other times, someone asks if she might take a little less, and after a brief pause, she usually agrees, the profit motive here always secondary to the more important goal of clearing space in the garage. By mid-morning, the can has become a small landmark of its own, sitting steady on the corner of the table, its weight a quiet testament to how the morning has gone so far. Children passing by sometimes stare at it curiously, fascinated by the sheer volume of coins visible through its dented opening, while their parents steer them gently back toward the toy table instead. When the sale finally winds down for the day, the can will be carried carefully back into the kitchen, its contents poured out across the table for a final count. But for now it remains exactly where it belongs, a simple, unassuming fixture of the morning, holding within it the quiet, accumulated proof of dozens of small, honest exchanges between neighbours and strangers alike. Cardboard has a smell all its own when it has sat in a garage through a few humid summers, slightly sweet, slightly dusty. As the boxes get opened and their contents laid out across the tables, that smell mixes with the morning air, with fresh coffee, with cut grass from the lawn next door. It becomes, for a few hours, the smell of the whole neighbourhood. You notice it most when you lean over a freshly opened box, that particular scent rising up to meet you, equal parts nostalgia and simple physical decay. It is the smell of paper that has absorbed years of humidity, of glue slowly softening in its seams, of a material that has quietly aged in the dark corner of a garage while life went on without it. There is nothing unpleasant about it exactly, just a distinct, unmistakable quality that instantly signals the presence of things long stored away. As more boxes get opened along the row of tables, that smell begins to blend with everything else happening around it. Somewhere nearby, a thermos of coffee sits open on a folding chair, its rich, bitter aroma drifting through the cooler morning air. Next door, someone is already running a mower across their lawn, the fresh, green scent of cut grass carrying easily over the low hedge that separates the two properties. All of it mingles together into something that feels, unmistakably, like a Saturday morning in this particular kind of neighbourhood. You reach into one of the boxes, pulling out a stack of old magazines, their pages carrying a faint mustiness that seems to intensify as you fan them open to check for missing pages. Beside them, wrapped loosely in newspaper gone brittle and yellow, sits a set of ceramic figurines, each one smelling faintly of the same cardboard dust that clings to everything else this morning. It is strange how thoroughly a smell can attach itself to memory, how simply opening a box can transport you instantly back to some earlier point in the family's life, a holiday, a birthday, some ordinary afternoon when these objects were still in regular use. A customer leans over the table beside you, picking up an old lampshade, turning it over in her hands while breathing in that same distinct scent. She mentions, almost without thinking, that it reminds her of her grandmother's attic, and you nod in easy agreement, because there is something universal about this smell, something that seems to belong not just to your garage, but to countless attics and basements and closets across the entire neighbourhood. As the morning progresses and more boxes get emptied, the scent begins to fade slightly, diluted by the growing warmth of the sun and the increasing number of people moving between the tables. But every so often a fresh box gets opened somewhere along the row, and that same distinctive smell rises up again, a small reminder of everything that has been sitting quietly in storage until this particular morning. There is something oddly comforting about it, this smell that signals not decay exactly, but transition, the moment when things move from being forgotten to being noticed again, if only briefly, before finding their way into someone else's home. You breathe it in one more time, standing over a nearly empty box, and think about how strange it is that something as simple as old cardboard can carry so much quiet history within its fibres. By midday, the smell will have mostly dissipated into the general warmth of the afternoon, but for now, in these early hours, it remains a defining part of the experience, this particular blend of dust and paper and glue that marks a garage sale morning as distinctly and unmistakably its own. They arrive earlier than expected, sometimes even before the tables are fully set. A car slows at the curb, and a woman steps out with her coffee still in hand, clearly a seasoned veteran of this particular Saturday ritual. She moves with purpose toward the table of dishware before anyone else even notices the sale has begun. There is an unspoken respect for these early birds, the ones who know that the good finds disappear fast. Her car door closes with a soft, practiced click, and she is already moving before you have fully registered her arrival, her steps quick but unhurried, the walk of someone who has done this hundreds of times before and knows exactly how to make the most of these first crucial minutes. Her coffee travels with her in one hand, steam rising faintly into the cool morning air, while her other hand reaches out toward the nearest table almost before she has come to a full stop. You watch her scan the dishware with a practiced eye, fingers moving quickly over stacked plates and mismatched teacups, searching for whatever specific treasure she has trained herself to recognize at a glance. There is no hesitation in her movements, no wasted time on items that clearly do not interest her. She's clearly learned through years of early morning sales just like this one, exactly what she's looking for and exactly how quickly it can disappear if she pauses too long. A second car pulls up moments later, then a third, each one arriving with the same quiet urgency. Drivers who have clearly mapped out their morning route in advance, planning to hit several sales before the day gets too warm or too crowded. These are not casual browsers. These are dedicated early risers, people who understand that the true value of a garage sale often reveals itself only in these first 15 minutes, before anyone else has had a chance to pick through the good pieces. You find yourself standing back slightly, watching this small, quiet rush unfold with a mixture of amusement and appreciation. There is something almost athletic about the way these early customers move, efficient and purposeful, each one seemingly aware of the others without ever acknowledging them directly. A polite nod here, a murmured good morning there, but otherwise everyone remains focused entirely on the tables in front of them. The woman with the coffee eventually settles on a small stack of teacups, holding each one up to the early light to check for chips or cracks, before setting them carefully into a canvas bag she has brought along for exactly this purpose. She approaches you with the exact change already counted out in her palm, clearly having priced the stack mentally before you even had the chance to quote her a number. Behind her, another early arrival moves toward the tool table, running experienced hands over an old hand plane, testing its weight, checking the blade for rust, all before the sun has fully cleared the rooftops across the street. There is a kind of quiet camaraderie among these early customers, even without much conversation passing between them, a shared understanding that this particular hour belongs to those dedicated enough to claim it. As the woman with the teacups climbs back into her car, offering a small wave of thanks, you notice the morning has already shifted subtly, the driveway now holding slightly fewer treasures than it did just 20 minutes earlier. It is a small, satisfying kind of proof that the sale has properly begun, That word of mouth and habit and hand-painted signs have once again done their quiet work of drawing people toward your driveway before the rest of the neighbourhood has even finished its first cup of coffee. As the morning stretches on, it is not just strangers who show up. Neighbours in bathrobes and slippers shuffle over from 2 houses down, curious about what is for sale before they have even had their own breakfast. They linger longer than customers, chatting about the weather, about a mutual friend's new car, about nothing much at all. The sale becomes, for a little while, just an excuse to stand outside and talk. You spot them approaching from a distance, recognisable by their unhurried pace and their clearly unofficial morning attire, robes cinched loosely, slippers scuffing softly against the pavement. There is no pretense of shopping urgency in their approach, no early bird determination like the strangers who arrived before sunrise. These are people who already know most of what sits on your tables, having glimpsed pieces of your family's life over years of shared fences and casual conversations across the yard. The first neighbour to arrive is holding her own coffee mug, steam curling upward into the cool morning air, her robe patterned with faded flowers that have clearly survived countless mornings just like this one. She offers a warm, easy greeting, her eyes drifting briefly over the tables before settling back on you, more interested in conversation than in anything currently for sale. The weather comes up first, as it always does, a comment about how pleasant the morning feels, how it might get warmer by afternoon. From there, the conversation drifts easily, the way it always does between people who have known each other long enough to skip past small talk and move directly into the comfortable middle ground of shared neighbourhood knowledge. She mentions a mutual friend's new car, parked proudly in a driveway just around the corner, and you both spend a moment discussing its features with more enthusiasm than either of you probably feels, simply because it gives the conversation somewhere pleasant to go. Another neighbour wanders over from the opposite direction, this one still in slippers that have clearly seen better days, offering a lazy wave before settling into an easy lean against your fence. He glances over the tool table with mild interest, picking up an old handsaw before setting it back down almost immediately, clearly more interested in the company than the merchandise. Between them, the conversation continues its slow drift, touching on nothing particularly important but somehow feeling entirely necessary all the same. Children from these same houses trail along behind their parents, still in pyjamas, rubbing sleep from their eyes as they wander toward the toy table with the same casual curiosity as the adults around them. They do not ask to buy anything just yet, still too groggy from sleep to fully engage, but they linger nonetheless, drawn by simple curiosity toward whatever treasures might be sitting out this morning. You find yourself relaxing into this particular rhythm, less focused on selling and more focused on simply enjoying this small pocket of neighbourhood connection that only seems to happen on mornings exactly like this one. There is something genuinely pleasant about standing in your own driveway, coffee in hand, discussing nothing of real consequence with people who live close enough to share in the small, ordinary rhythms of your life. Eventually, one neighbour mentions needing to get back before her own coffee goes cold, and the conversation winds down as naturally as it began, without any formal goodbye, just a gradual drift back toward her own front door. The other neighbour lingers a few minutes longer, finishing his own thought about the mutual friend's car before finally wandering back down the street himself. For a few minutes after they leave, the driveway feels quieter again, but pleasantly so, carrying with it the warm residue of easy conversation that had nothing at all to do with buying or selling, and everything to do with simply being neighbours on an ordinary Saturday morning. Near the edge of the driveway sits a table crowded with things that once meant everything to a child. A scuffed toy truck, a doll missing one shoe, a stack of comic books with curling corners. Kids from the neighbourhood crouch beside it, sorting through treasures with the seriousness of miners panning for gold. A few coins change hands, and just like that, someone else's forgotten toy finds a new home. The truck sits prominently at the centre of the table, its metal body dented slightly along one side, the paint worn thin from what was clearly years of enthusiastic play across driveways and sidewalks just like this one. A small boy approaches it cautiously, as though sensing its significance before he even understands why, running his fingers along its cool metal surface before finally picking it up to test its weight in his hands. Beside the truck lies the doll, her dress slightly faded from years of sunlight, one small shoe missing entirely, replaced by nothing but a bare porcelain foot. A young girl spots her from several feet away and moves directly toward her, ignoring everything else on the table in favour of this one particular treasure. She holds the doll gently, almost protectively, already imagining, you suspect, all the adventures the two of them might share together once she gets her home. The comic books sit in a slightly disorganised stack, their corners curled from humidity, their covers faded just enough to suggest real use rather than careful preservation. A boy a little older than the others flips through them methodically, checking issue numbers with the seriousness of someone assembling a much larger collection back home. He sets aside 3 or 4 that catch his interest, stacking them neatly beside him on the table while he continues his search. You watch this small gathering of children with quiet amusement, each one approaching the table with their own particular focus, their own private sense of what makes something worth taking home. There is no adult supervision required here, no negotiation beyond the simple exchange of a few coins pulled from small pockets, counted carefully before being handed over with genuine seriousness. A younger child, barely old enough to count properly, holds up a small handful of change toward you, uncertain whether it is enough for the toy truck he has been eyeing since he arrived. You glance at the correct amount, take exactly what is needed, and let him keep the rest, watching his face light up with a particular joy that only comes from a successful, independent transaction completed entirely on his own. The girl with the doll approaches next, her offering slightly overcounted in her enthusiasm, and you make the appropriate change while she watches with rapt attention, clearly more interested in getting her new companion home than in any careful accounting of coins. She thanks you politely, the kind of practiced politeness taught carefully by a watching parent standing just a few feet away, before hurrying off toward her own yard with the doll held carefully against her chest. By mid-morning the table has thinned considerably, its once crowded surface now holding only a scattering of items that fail to catch anyone's particular interest. A puzzle missing several pieces, a stuffed animal with a slightly torn seam. But what remains matters less than what has already found new homes across the neighbourhood. Small treasures now beginning entirely new chapters in different children's lives. Their old stories quietly left behind on your driveway, replaced now by whatever new adventures await them. There is something quietly satisfying in watching this particular exchange unfold throughout the morning. Objects that once meant everything to your own children, now passing seamlessly into the hands of someone else's, carrying forward the same simple joy that objects like these seem built to provide regardless of which driveway they happen to call home. A metal rod strung between 2 ladders holds a modest collection of dresses, coats and Sunday suits, each one carrying a little bit of someone's past inside its stitching. A woman runs her fingers along the fabric, checking the seams the way her own mother taught her. Nearby, a young mother holds up a small coat against her son, gauging whether it might fit him by next winter. The rod itself creaks slightly under the weight of the garments, a simple length of pipe balanced carefully between 2 stepladders, positioned at either end of the makeshift rack. The dresses hang closest to the front, their fabric ranging from soft cotton prints to something slightly more formal, a dark green dress with a delicate collar that clearly saw its share of church services and holiday gatherings before finding its way here. The woman inspecting the fabric moves with practiced hands, feeling along each seam with quiet concentration, checking for loose threads or weak stitching before deciding whether an item is worth a modest price, marked on a small paper tag pinned to its collar. She learned this careful inspection from her own mother. She mentions almost absent-mindedly, a habit passed down through generations of women who understood that quality mattered more than appearance, that a well-made garment could outlast fashion trends by decades if properly cared for. Behind the dresses, a row of coats hangs heavier against the rod, wool fabric that carries a faint, lingering scent of cedar from whatever closet it spent the winter, storage months inside. A young mother approaches this section next, her son standing patiently beside her, clearly more interested in the toy table just a few feet away than in anything currently happening with his own wardrobe. She holds up a small navy coat against his shoulders, studying the fit with a critical eye, mentally calculating how much room he might still need to grow into by the time winter properly arrives. The suits hang toward the far end of the rack, their fabric slightly stiffer, clearly reserved for more formal occasions than everyday wear. A man passing by pauses to examine one, checking the stitching along the lapel, running a thumb across the fabric to gauge its quality. He mentions, almost to himself, that suits like this simply are not made the same way anymore, a small observation that carries within it a quiet appreciation for the craftsmanship of an earlier era. You watch these small inspections continue throughout the morning, each customer bringing their own particular expertise to the process, checking buttons, examining hems, holding garments up to the light to check for any hidden wear that might not be immediately obvious. There is a seriousness to this kind of shopping that feels different from the toy table or the dishware, a recognition that clothing carries within it both practical value and a certain kind of inherited wisdom about quality and craftsmanship. The young mother eventually decides the navy coat will do nicely, folding it carefully over her arm, while her son tugs impatiently at her sleeve, eager to return his attention to more interesting matters. She thanks you warmly, mentioning that with growing boys, a good coat rarely goes to waste, regardless of whose closet it originally came from. By late morning, the rack has thinned noticeably, several dresses and one of the suits already claimed by customers who recognized quality when they saw it. What remains sways gently on the metal rod whenever a breeze passes through the driveway, fabric catching the sunlight in a way that makes even the simplest garments look, for just a moment, entirely worth a second glance. Somewhere near the housewares table, a quiet negotiation is underway. A man holds up a chipped teapot and asks if the seller might take a dime instead of a quarter. There is a pause, a considering look, and then a small nod of agreement. It is a transaction so small it hardly matters in dollars, but it carries its own quiet satisfaction, the feeling of a fair deal struck between two people who will likely never see each other again. The teapot itself is nothing particularly special. A simple ceramic piece with a small chip along its spout, the kind of imperfection that would have relegated it to the back of a cupboard long before it ever made its way onto today's table. The man turns it over carefully in his hands, examining the chip more closely, clearly weighing whether the flaw is significant enough to justify his modest counteroffer. You watch this small negotiation unfold with quiet amusement, recognizing immediately the particular rhythm of this kind of exchange, an unspoken dance that has played out on driveways just like this one for as long as anyone can remember. The man's offer is not aggressive, not even particularly serious in tone, more a gentle testing of the waters to see whether some small flexibility might exist in the marked price. There is a brief pause after his question, a moment where the seller considers the offer with the same careful weighing that the man applied to the teapot itself. It is not really about the 15 cents at stake, not really about profit or loss in any meaningful sense. It is more about the simple satisfaction of the negotiation itself, the small performance of consideration before finally arriving at an agreement that leaves both parties feeling as though they got something reasonable out of the exchange. The nod comes eventually, accompanied by a small smile that suggests genuine goodwill rather than any real concession of value. The man hands over his dime with visible satisfaction, tucking the teapot carefully under his arm as though he has just completed a transaction of real significance rather than something worth barely more than a candy bar. Nearby, another small negotiation unfolds almost simultaneously. A woman examining a stack of mismatched saucers, asking whether the whole lot might go for slightly less than the combined individual prices. The seller considers this for a moment, doing quick mental math, before agreeing to a modest bundle discount that feels fair to both parties involved. These small negotiations continue throughout the morning in quiet, understated ways, never rising to anything resembling real conflict, always settling eventually into some mutually agreeable middle ground. There is something almost ritualistic about it, this gentle back and forth over nickels and dimes, each exchange carrying within it an unspoken acknowledgement that the numbers themselves matter far less than the simple pleasure of the negotiation. You find yourself appreciating this particular rhythm as the morning continues, the way strangers approach these small transactions with such genuine care, treating a quarter's difference with the same thoughtful consideration they might apply to a much larger purchase. It reflects something quietly admirable about this kind of morning, the way even the smallest exchange gets treated with real attention and respect. By the time the man with the teapot has wandered back toward his car, the negotiation already fading into the general background noise of the morning, you find yourself smiling faintly at how much genuine satisfaction can be extracted from something as small as a 10-cent difference in price. It is perhaps one of the quieter pleasures of a morning like this, the reminder that value is never really just about dollars and cents, but about the small human exchange that happens whenever two people agree, however briefly, on what something is truly worth. Set up on a card table near the garage entrance sits an old record player, its speaker crackling faintly with whatever record happens to be spinning. It is not for sale, not yet anyway, but it plays anyway, filling the driveway with a soundtrack that makes the whole morning feel a little more like an event and a little less like chores. The wood veneer casing has faded slightly along the top, sun-bleached from years of sitting near a window somewhere in the house, before finally making its way out here for the day. Its needle rests gently in the groove of a record that has clearly been played more times than anyone bothered to count, the surface noise almost as familiar now as the music itself, a soft, crackling hiss that fills the pauses between notes. You pass by it ever so often, checking that the needle has not skipped, that the volume remains at that easy, unobtrusive level meant to fill the air without demanding anyone's full attention. It is doing exactly the job it was brought out here to do, providing a gentle undercurrent to the morning, something for browsing customers to hum along to without quite realizing they're doing it. A man flipping through the record crate beside it pauses his search whenever a particular song catches his attention, tapping his foot lightly against the concrete before returning to his methodical search through the stack. He asks, almost hopefully, whether the player itself might eventually be added to the sale, and you tell him honestly that you have not yet decided, that some mornings the answer changes depending on how the day unfolds. Children drift near it occasionally, drawn by the sound rather than any particular interest in the machine itself, standing for a moment to listen before wandering back toward the toy table. A neighbour passing by comments on the song currently playing, recognising it from some dance years back, and for a moment the two of you talk about that instead of anything on the tables. The record itself gets flipped eventually, side one giving way to side two, the brief silence between them feeling oddly noticeable after so long spent underneath its steady hum. You place the needle down carefully, watching it settle into the groove, and the music resumes exactly where it belongs, filling the driveway once more with something warm and familiar. By mid-morning, the player has become something like a fixture of the sale itself, less an item for purchase and more a quiet host for the whole gathering, setting a pace that nobody consciously notices but everybody seems to move a little easier because of. Even the negotiations at the housewares table seem to unfold a touch more pleasantly, with music drifting steadily in the background. Eventually, as the sun climbs higher and the crowd shifts toward afternoon regulars, you turn the volume down slightly, letting it fade into something more like ambience than centerpiece. But it never quite stops playing, this small, faithful machine doing its part to make an ordinary Saturday morning feel like something worth remembering. Rows of mismatched dishes catch the morning light, some chipped, some barely used, all of them carrying faint memories of dinners long past. A stack of mixing bowls nest together at odd angles. A rolling pin lies beside a set of measuring cups missing their quarter cup. Each item tells a small story nobody bothers to ask about, and somehow that is part of the charm. The plates closest to the front catch the sun directly, their glaze reflecting small flashes of light whenever someone shifts them to look underneath for a maker's mark. A woman lifts one carefully, checking its weight in her palm, turning it over to examine the faint pattern worn thin along its edge from years of careful washing. She sets it down again gently, moving to the next, her fingers moving with the practiced patience of someone who has done this many times before. The mixing bowls sit stacked in a slightly precarious tower, their ceramic surfaces ranging from a deep, earthy brown to a pale, buttery yellow that has clearly seen decades of use folding batter and whisking eggs. A woman lifts the smallest one free, checking for cracks along its rim, before setting it aside in the small pile she's already started gathering nearby. The rolling pin rests quietly among the smaller tools, its wooden handles worn smooth from years of steady gripping, the roller itself slightly discoloured from flour that never quite washed away completely. Someone picks it up, testing its weight, running a thumb along its surface before deciding it might be exactly what her own kitchen has been missing. Nearby, the measuring cups sit stacked inside one another, missing that single quarter cup that seems to disappear from every set eventually, lost somewhere between countless recipes and careless moves between kitchens. A customer notices the gap immediately, laughing softly, mentioning that her own set is missing the very same size, as though it were some universal, unavoidable rule of kitchen tools everywhere. You watch these small inspections unfold across the table, each item receiving its own brief moment of consideration, turned over, checked, weighed against whatever mental criteria the customer has brought with them this morning. Nobody asks where any of it came from, what dinners it once helped prepare, what holidays it might have witnessed. The stories remain quietly attached to each piece, invisible but somehow still present in the worn edges and faded patterns. By mid-morning, several pieces have already found their way into canvas bags and cardboard boxes, carried off toward new kitchens where they will begin collecting entirely new stories of their own. What remains continues to catch the sun, exactly as it did at the start of the morning, patient and unhurried, waiting for whoever might still need a chipped plate or a well-worn rolling pin to complete their own kitchen's quiet collection. A cardboard box sits half open, filled with paperbacks whose spines have gone soft from years of handling. A woman sorts through them slowly, pulling out titles she remembers reading on porches long ago. There is a small hesitation before she sets each one back down, as if she's saying goodbye to a piece of her own younger self. The box itself has softened slightly at the corners, the cardboard giving under her fingers as she leans over it, her eyes scanning the spines with the particular focus of someone searching for something specific without quite knowing what it is until she sees it. The paperbacks lean against each other at odd angles, their covers faded from years spent on a shelf near a sunny window, some titles barely legible anymore beneath the wear. She pulls one out carefully, its spine cracked in several places from having been opened and reopened many times over the years. She turns it over in her hands, reading the back cover copy with a small private smile, clearly remembering something about the story itself, or perhaps simply about the summer she first read it, stretched out on a porch somewhere with lemonade sweating in a glass beside her. Another title catches her eye, and she reaches for it with slightly more urgency, recognizing the cover art immediately even before she can read the author's name. She holds it for a long moment, thumb tracing over the worn edges, before setting it gently back into the box, as though returning an old friend to its resting place, rather than simply declining to purchase it. You watch this quiet ritual unfold without interrupting, recognizing that this particular kind of shopping carries with it something more personal than practical. She is not just looking for books to read. She is searching, in some small way, for pieces of a version of herself that existed decades earlier, evenings spent lost in stories that she remembers more through feeling than through plot. Eventually she selects 3 titles, holding them against her chest for a moment before finally approaching you with the correct change already counted in her palm. She mentions, almost apologetically, that she probably has read most of these before, somewhere, sometime, but that something about seeing them again made her want to bring them home regardless. You nod, understanding completely, recognizing that these paperbacks carry within them more than just stories, more than words and pages that could easily be replaced by newer editions. They carry the specific texture of memory itself, softened covers and cracked spines serving as physical reminders of afternoons and summers long since past. As she walks back toward her car, the 3 books held carefully against her side, the box behind her remains only slightly thinner, still holding dozens of other stories waiting for someone else to recognize something of themselves inside their worn familiar pages. Out on the grass, a few larger pieces sit waiting for a new home, a wooden chair with a wobbly leg, a small side table, a rocking horse that has clearly seen better days. These items draw a different kind of customer, someone thinking practically about a spare room or a nursery, running a hand along the wood to check for solidness before deciding whether it is worth hauling home. The chair sits slightly askew on the uneven grass, one leg noticeably shorter than the others, causing it to rock gently whenever anyone leans against it to test its sturdiness. A man crouches beside it, running his hand along the joint where the wobble originates, considering aloud whether a simple shim or a bit of wood glue might solve the problem easily enough to make the modest asking price worthwhile. Nearby, the small side table waits patiently in the morning sun, its surface bearing the faint rings of countless coffee cups and glasses set down carelessly over years of use. A woman studies it for a long moment, opening the single drawer to check its function, sliding it in and out several times to confirm it moves smoothly despite its age. The rocking horse commands its own particular attention, its painted surface faded and chipped in places, one ear slightly worn down from years of small hands gripping tight during imagined gallops across countless living rooms. A young couple approaches it together, the woman kneeling down to give it a gentle push, watching it rock back and forth with a creak that somehow only adds to its charm rather than detracting from it. They speak quietly to each other, clearly already picturing it in some room not yet fully furnished, some nursery still waiting for the right pieces to make it feel complete. The man tests its stability by pressing down firmly on its back, checking that the joints still hold despite the visible wear, nodding with quiet satisfaction when everything remains solid beneath his hand. You watch these considerations unfold with a kind of quiet appreciation, recognizing that furniture shopping at a morning like this involves a different kind of scrutiny than anything found at the dish table or the toy table. These are practical decisions, weighing function against price, imagining these pieces not as they sit now on your lawn, but as they might look settled into someone else's home, serving some new purpose in some new room. The chair eventually finds a buyer in the man who first noticed its wobble, convinced that a bit of glue will solve the issue easily enough. The side table follows shortly after, the woman deciding its drawer works well enough to justify the modest price. The rocking horse takes longer, the young couple stepping away to discuss it privately before returning with their decision made, carrying it carefully between them toward their car. By late morning, the lawn holds noticeably less than it did at daybreak, each piece now bound for some new home where it will continue serving whatever quiet purpose furniture like this seems built to provide, regardless of how many previous homes it has already known. By mid-morning, the crowd begins to thin, and a quiet lull settles over the driveway. The seller takes a seat in a folding lawn chair, wiping sweat from the back of the neck despite the mild weather. It is the kind of pause that feels earned, a moment to simply watch the street, to sip a glass of iced tea, to let the sun do its slow work overhead. The lawn chair creaks slightly as you settle into it, the woven straps sagging just enough to feel familiar rather than uncomfortable, shaped by years of exactly this kind of use. The glass of iced tea beside you has already begun to sweat, small beads of condensation gathering along its surface, and you wrap your fingers around it gratefully, feeling the coolness seep into your palm. The street stretches quiet in front of you now, the earlier rush of cars and pedestrians giving way to something more relaxed, occasional foot traffic drifting by without the urgency that marked the morning's first hour. A dog wanders past on its own private errand, pausing briefly to sniff at the edge of your lawn before continuing on its way without much interest in anything you have laid out. You take a slow sip of the tea, letting the sweetness linger for a moment before swallowing, your eyes drifting lazily over the remaining tables, noting what has sold and what still waits patiently for its turn. The sun has climbed higher now, warming the driveway in a way that makes the earlier morning chill feel like a distant memory, though the day has not yet grown uncomfortably hot. Somewhere down the street, a screen door slaps shut, followed by the muffled sound of a radio playing from an open window. These small, ordinary sounds fill the quiet gap left by the absence of customers, reminding you that the neighbourhood continues its usual rhythms regardless of whatever is or is not happening on your particular driveway this morning. You lean back slightly, letting your shoulders relax against the chair's woven straps, allowing yourself for just a few minutes to simply exist within this pause, rather than anticipating whatever comes next. There is no rush to fill this silence, no urgency to reorganize the tables or check the coffee can. It is simply a moment to rest, earned honestly by the steady work of the morning already behind you. A car passes slowly, its driver glancing toward your tables with mild curiosity before continuing on without stopping, and you watch it go without any particular disappointment. Not every car needs to stop. Not every moment needs to produce a sale. Sometimes the quiet itself is enough. A small reward tucked between the earlier rush and whatever afternoon crowd might still arrive. You finish the last of your tea, setting the glass down on the concrete beside your chair, and glance once more down the empty street, feeling entirely at ease in this brief, unhurried pause before the day continues on its way. An older man stops at the tool table, turning over a hand plane in his palms with obvious familiarity. He mentions, almost to himself, that he used to have one just like it years ago before it got lost in a move. The seller nods along, and for a moment, two strangers share a small connection built entirely around an old, worn piece of metal and wood. His hands move over the tool with practiced ease, fingers finding the worn grip along its handle, almost without needing to look. The kind of familiarity that only comes from years spent actually using something, rather than simply admiring it from a distance. He turns it over slowly, checking the blade, running his thumb lightly along its edge with the careful respect of someone who understands exactly what this particular tool is capable of. He mentions the move almost offhandedly, the way people often speak about losses that still carry some quiet weight even decades later. A cross-country relocation sometime in his younger years, boxes packed hastily, some things simply left behind or misplaced along the way. This plane, he says, had belonged to his own father, passed down through a small collection of tools that mostly scattered eventually, some lost, some given away, some simply worn out through years of honest use. You listen without interrupting, recognizing the particular value of this moment, the way a simple tool sitting on a folding table can suddenly become a doorway into someone else's entire history. He continues, almost unprompted, describing afternoons spent in his father's workshop, the smell of sawdust, the careful lessons in patience that came along with learning to use a plane properly, taking thin, even shavings rather than rushing the wood. The story unfolds slowly without any urgency, exactly the kind of unhurried conversation that seems to belong naturally to mornings like this one. You find yourself asking a small question here and there, encouraging him gently to continue, genuinely curious about this glimpse into a life entirely separate from your own, connected only by this modest tool resting between his palms. Eventually he sets the plane down against the table, considering it for a long moment before deciding, with a small satisfied nod, that he will take it home with him. It is not really about needing another tool, he admits with a faint smile. It is more about the chance to hold something so similar to what he lost all those years ago, a small way of reconnecting with a memory that has stayed with him far longer than the tool itself ever did. You accept his payment, wrapping the plane loosely in an old newspaper before handing it back to him, and he thanks you warmly, tucking it carefully under his arm as though it were something far more valuable than its modest price might suggest. As he walks back toward his car, you find yourself thinking about how many small stories like this one must unfold across countless driveways every single Saturday morning. Strangers connecting briefly and unexpectedly over some worn, ordinary object that happens to carry within it an entirely unexpected weight of memory. At the end of the driveway, a smaller operation runs alongside the main event, a hand-lettered sign advertising lemonade for a nickel a cup. A couple of children man their stand with fierce concentration, pouring drinks with careful, unsteady hands. Adults humour them generously, dropping coins into a jar even when they are not particularly thirsty. Their small table wobbles slightly under the weight of a large glass pitcher, its surface beaded with condensation. Ice cubes clinking softly whenever someone bumps the table even slightly. The sign propped beside it has clearly been made with the same enthusiasm as the larger garage sale sign down the street, its letters slightly uneven, coloured in with whatever crayons happen to be within reach. The older of the two children takes her role seriously, pouring each cup with careful concentration, her tongue poking out slightly between her lips as she focuses on not spilling a single drop. Her younger brother handles the money, counting nickels with painstaking slowness, occasionally needing her help to confirm he has given the correct change back to a patient customer. A man approaches with exaggerated seriousness, examining the menu, though there is only one item available, before finally ordering a cup with the same gravity he might apply to a much larger purchase. The girl pours carefully, handing it over with visible pride, watching closely as he takes his first sip and offers an enthusiastic, if slightly performed review of its quality. Another customer approaches shortly after, A woman who mentions she is not particularly thirsty but would like a cup anyway, dropping a quarter into their jar and waving away the change with a warm smile. The children exchange a quick, delighted glance, clearly recognizing this small act of generosity, even if they do not fully understand the economics behind it. You watch this small operation unfold with quiet amusement, recognizing how naturally it has become woven into the larger morning, customers drifting easily between examining old dishware and stopping for a quick sweet drink on their way back to their cars. The lemonade itself is a bit too sweet, a bit too watery in places where the ice has melted faster than expected. But nobody seems to mind in the slightest. The pitcher empties gradually throughout the morning, refilled once from a fresh batch mixed inside the kitchen, the children taking turns stirring it with the same serious concentration they bring to everything else about their small enterprise. Their jar grows heavier with nickels and quarters, a small fortune by their own measure, counted excitedly between customers whenever a brief lull allows. By the time the morning crowd begins to thin, their pitcher sits nearly empty, and their jar holds more coins than either of them quite knows what to do with just yet. They beam with the particular pride that only comes from a successful first taste of independent enterprise, already discussing between themselves what they might do with their earnings, voices bright with the kind of uncomplicated joy that belongs entirely to mornings exactly like this one. A woman with a keen eye moves methodically from table to table, picking up items, turning them over, setting them back down if they do not meet some private standard only she understands. She has clearly done this before, many times, and she moves with the confidence of someone who knows exactly what a good deal looks like before she even sees the price tag. She begins at the far end of the driveway, working her way steadily toward the garage with the kind of systematic thoroughness that suggests years of practice at exactly this particular hobby. Nothing escapes her attention entirely, though most items receive only a brief glance before her eyes move on, already scanning the next table for something more promising. At the dishware table, she lifts a teacup, checking its underside for a maker's mark with practiced speed, setting it down again within seconds when she finds nothing of particular interest. She moves next to the linens, running her fingers quickly across the fabric, checking for quality without needing to examine every single piece individually, her instincts apparently sharp enough to recognize value almost by touch alone. At the tool table she pauses slightly longer, picking up an old hand drill and testing its mechanism with quick, confident movements, clearly more knowledgeable about such things than her casual appearance might suggest. She sets it aside in a small pile she's begun accumulating nearby, a growing collection of items that have each somehow passed her private unspoken test. You watch her progress with quiet fascination, recognizing in her movements the particular expertise of someone who has spent countless Saturday mornings exactly like this one, developing an instinct for value that goes well beyond simply reading a price tag. She seems to understand, almost intuitively, which items carry genuine worth beneath their humble presentation, and which merely look interesting without offering anything of real substance. At the furniture section, she runs her hand along the joints of an old side table, checking for looseness, nodding slightly to herself before adding it mentally to her growing list of potential purchases. She barely glances at the price, seemingly more interested in confirming the item's underlying quality than in negotiating its cost, trusting that a fair price will follow naturally from genuine value. By the time she reaches the final table near the garage entrance, her small pile has grown considerably, an assortment of items spanning nearly every category the sale has to offer, each one selected with the same quiet confidence that has marked her progress since she first stepped out of her car. She approaches you finally with her selections, ready to negotiate the total with the same practiced ease she brought to identifying each individual piece. The conversation that follows is brief and efficient, numbers exchange with mutual respect, both of you recognizing that this is not her first negotiation, and likely will not be her last. She counts out the agreed amount without hesitation, tucking her newfound treasures carefully into a large canvas bag clearly reserved for exactly this purpose. As she walks back toward her car, her bag noticeably heavier than when she arrived, you find yourself appreciating the particular skill she brought this morning, a reminder that for some people, garage sale shopping is not merely a casual pastime, but something closer to a genuine, practiced art. As lunchtime approaches, a new wave of visitors appears, families out for a Saturday drive who spotted the sign and decided to stop. Children tumble out of station wagons while their parents browse more leisurely than the early morning crowd. The pace of the sale shifts slower now, more social, less about urgency, and more about simply enjoying the afternoon. The station wagons pull up one after another, their doors swinging open to release children who have clearly been sitting still far longer than their patience allows, tumbling out onto the driveway with the particular energy of kids grateful for any excuse to stretch their legs. Their parents follow more slowly, taking their time climbing out, glancing around the remaining tables with the relaxed curiosity of people who were not necessarily planning to stop but decided the sign looked promising enough to justify a short detour. Unlike the earlier crowd, there is no urgency in their movements, no quick practice scanning for specific treasures before someone else claims them first. These families move at a leisurely pace, examining items together, discussing potential purchases in low, unhurried voices, clearly more interested in making an enjoyable afternoon out of the stop than in securing any particular bargain. A father lingers at the tool table, explaining to his young son the purpose of various items with patient enthusiasm, clearly enjoying the chance to share a bit of practical knowledge on an otherwise ordinary Saturday. The boy listens with genuine interest, occasionally reaching out to touch something that catches his eye, careful under his father's watchful gaze. Meanwhile, a mother examines the remaining dishware, holding pieces up to compare against ones she already owns at home, clearly more interested in filling a small gap in her existing set than in acquiring anything dramatically new. Her daughter tugs gently at her sleeve, pointing toward the toy table with obvious hope, and the mother glances over with an indulgent smile before agreeing to a brief detour in that direction. You find yourself enjoying this shift in pace as much as anyone, the earlier morning's urgency giving way to something more relaxed and conversational. Customers linger longer now, asking questions about items with genuine curiosity rather than simply negotiating price, occasionally sharing small stories of their own that echo the sentimental value still clinging to whatever remains on your tables. The sun sits higher now, warming the driveway pleasantly, without yet tipping into uncomfortable heat, and there is an easy, unhurried quality to the whole scene that feels distinctly different from the brisk efficiency of the early morning rush. Families move between tables with the same relaxed energy they might bring to a leisurely walk through a park, in no particular hurry to finish and move along to wherever else their Saturday drive might eventually take them. By the time this particular wave of visitors begins drifting back toward their station wagons, several more items have found new homes, though the negotiations felt more like pleasant conversations than any kind of serious bargaining. Children climb back into their seats, clutching small treasures from the toy table, while their parents settle back behind the wheel, waving a friendly goodbye before pulling away to continue their unplanned Saturday adventure. By early afternoon, certain items have clearly been passed over again and again. An old lamp with a slightly crooked shade, a stack of mismatched picture frames, a box of odds and ends nobody quite knows what to do with. The seller begins considering whether these things might simply go to the curb by evening, or perhaps get boxed up again for another try next weekend. The lamp sits at the edge of the table, its shade tilted at an angle that no amount of adjusting seems able to fully correct. a small flaw that has apparently been enough to discourage even the most casual browsers from giving it a second glance. You straighten it once more out of habit, though you suspect by now that its fate has already been quietly decided by the collective indifference of the morning's steady stream of customers. The picture frames sit stacked haphazardly in a small box, their styles clashing awkwardly against one another, some ornate and gilded, others simple and plain, united only by the fact that none of them seem to have found anyone particularly interested in giving them a second life. You sift through them absently, wondering whether separating them individually might have made any real difference, though you suspect the issue lies less in presentation and more in simple, ordinary bad luck. The box of odds and ends has grown steadily throughout the morning, absorbing small items that never quite fit neatly into any other category. A single mismatched candlestick, a tangle of costume jewellery missing half its pairs, a small collection of keys that fit locks nobody can quite remember anymore. It sits now near the base of the table, its contents shifting slightly whenever the box gets nudged, a small monument to the parts of a household that rarely receive much attention even when they were still in regular use. You consider these leftover items with a mixture of mild amusement and quiet practicality, weighing the effort of repacking everything for another attempt next weekend against the simpler option of simply setting it all out by the curb once the day fully winds down. Neither option feels particularly urgent just yet, the afternoon still holding enough hours for a few more browsers to wander by, and perhaps find some unexpected use for whatever remains. A woman pauses briefly at the lamp, tilting her head as she considers its crooked shade, running her hand along its base before ultimately deciding against it. With a small, apologetic smile, she moves on to the picture frames instead, selecting 2 simple wooden ones from the stack, mentioning that she's been meaning to frame a few photographs for months now, and these will do just fine despite their obvious wear. It is a small victory, this modest sale from the otherwise overlooked leftovers, enough to make you reconsider entirely giving up on the rest just yet. Perhaps you think a few more hours of afternoon sun might still turn up someone willing to take a chance on a crooked lamp or a box of miscellaneous keys, each item still holding, however faintly, the quiet possibility of finding its own unexpected place in someone else's home. As the day wears on, a small hand-lettered addition appears on the sign, everything half price. It is a quiet acknowledgement that the goal now is less about profit and more about clearing space in the garage before Sunday. Customers who wandered through earlier and hesitated now find themselves returning, drawn back by the new numbers scrawled in pencil. You kneel beside the original sign, marker in hand, adding the new words in the same uneven lettering that has marked every other sign this morning, the ink slightly smudging where your hand brushes across it before it has fully dried. There is something almost freeing about this small act, a release of the earlier morning's careful pricing in favour of something simpler, a recognition that the afternoon calls for a different kind of arithmetic altogether. The first to notice is a woman who had lingered near the dishware nearly 2 hours earlier, turning over a serving platter she clearly liked but had not quite been willing to commit to at its original price. She reappears now, drawn back by the modest commotion of you crossing out old numbers and writing new ones, her face brightening with the particular satisfaction of someone who waited out a negotiation without ever having to say a word. Word seems to travel quickly down the block, the way it always does on mornings like this. Neighbours who wandered by earlier mentioning to other neighbours that prices have dropped, until a small resurgence of interest builds along your driveway that rivals even the earliest hours of the sale. Customers move with renewed energy now, revisiting tables they had already passed over once, checking whether anything previously dismissed as too expensive might now be worth a second look. A man who had debated over the old handplane earlier in the day returns as well, running his fingers along its handle once more before glancing toward you with a small, knowing smile, already aware that the new price will likely tip the balance in favour of finally taking it home. You quote him the adjusted number, and he nods immediately. No negotiation necessary this time, the discount itself having already done the work that any haggling might have accomplished otherwise. The coffee can grows lighter with change now, more bills accumulating instead, as customers take advantage of the reduced prices to gather multiple items at once, rather than agonising over single purchases. There is a different energy to this part of the afternoon, less deliberation, more decisive action, everyone sensing that whatever remains on these tables by evening will likely disappear entirely, either into someone's home or into a box destined for the curb. You watch this second wave of activity with quiet satisfaction, recognising that this shift was inevitable from the very first quarter and dime handed over that morning. The goal, after all, was never really about squeezing out every possible cent from each individual item. It was about clearing the garage, about making room, about sending these small pieces of your family's life out into new homes, where they might find continued use rather than sitting untouched in storage for another several years. By the time the half-price rush begins to slow, the tables look noticeably barer than they did even an hour earlier, gaps opening up where furniture and dishware once crowded together tightly. The remaining items sit more spaced out now, easier to browse, though fewer customers linger over them, with quite the same careful deliberation as those who came earlier in the day. You glance at the sign once more, its hastily added words still slightly damp at the edges, and feel a small sense of accomplishment at how effectively such a simple gesture managed to breathe new life into an afternoon that had otherwise begun slowing toward its natural end. As the afternoon light begins to soften, the tables start emptying in a different way now, not from sales, but from the slow work of packing everything back into boxes. What remains gets folded, stacked, and carried back toward the garage, some of it destined for another sale next month, some of it finally bound for the trash. The light has shifted noticeably since morning, taking on that warm, slanted quality that signals the day's slow drift toward evening, casting long shadows across the driveway where tables once stood crowded with treasures. You move methodically now, working your way from one end to the other, deciding item by item what deserves a second chance and what has simply run its course. The clothing rack comes down first, garments folded carefully back into the same boxes they emerged from the night before, though noticeably fewer in number now. The collection thinned considerably by the day's steady stream of customers. You fold each remaining piece with the same care you might have shown packing them away originally, some habit simply too ingrained to abandon even now, at the tail end of a long day. The dishware proves more complicated, each piece needing careful wrapping in newspaper before it can be safely stacked back into its box, a task that takes considerably longer than simply laying everything out that morning had. You work slowly through what remains, setting aside a few pieces that seem worth keeping after all, small items that suddenly feel more valuable now that the prospect of parting with them has become more immediate. The toy table proves the easiest, its remaining contents fitting easily into a single small box. The puzzle with missing pieces and the stuffed animal, with its torn seam, finally accepting their fate as items destined for the trash, rather than another chance at a future sale. You set this box aside separately, already mentally preparing yourself for the walk to the curb once everything else has been properly sorted. Your father returns to help with the furniture, the two of you working together to carry the unsold side table and the wooden chair back into the garage, its wobbly leg still not fixed by anyone brave enough to take on the small repair. You set them in a corner, mentally noting that these particular pieces might do better next month, once the memory of this Saturday has faded enough that new customers might see them with fresh eyes. The folding tables come down last. their metal legs folding inward with the same practiced ease that brought them upright at dawn, each one carried carefully back into the garage and leaned against the wall in roughly the same spot it occupied the evening before. There is something almost circular about this moment, the driveway slowly returning to its ordinary empty state, the whole elaborate arrangement of the day quietly dismantling itself piece by piece. By the time the last box finds its place back inside the garage, the sun has dropped considerably lower, casting the whole scene in that particular golden light that seems reserved specifically for the end of long, satisfying days. You stand for a moment amid the returning quiet, surveying the nearly bare driveway, feeling the particular tiredness that comes not from hardship, but from a day well spent. Sitting at the kitchen table that evening, the coffee can gets emptied out onto a checkered tablecloth, coins sorted into small piles, bills smoothed flat and counted twice. It is never a fortune, just enough for a nice dinner out, or perhaps tucked away towards something bigger. There is a quiet satisfaction in watching a garage full of forgotten things turn into something useful again. The coins spill out across the tablecloth with a soft clattering sound, quarters rolling briefly before settling flat, dimes and nickels scattering into a loose pile that needs sorting before any real counting can begin. You separate them methodically, quarters into one small stack, dimes into another, the familiar rhythm of counting change requiring little conscious thought after so many years of doing exactly this. The bills come next, a handful of ones and a few fives, slightly crumpled from having spent the day folded inside pockets and purses before finding their way into your coffee can. You smooth each one flat against the tablecloth, stacking them neatly, the kitchen light overhead catching the slight sheen of well-worn paper that has clearly passed through many hands before reaching yours. Your mother sits across from you, double-checking your count with the same careful attention she brought to watching the can throughout the day, her lips moving silently as she recounts each small pile just to be certain. There is no real doubt about the total, not really, but the ritual of confirming it twice feels important somehow. A final, careful acknowledgement of the day's honest work. The total, once fully tallied, is modest. Certainly nothing that will change anyone's circumstances in any dramatic way, but enough, perhaps, for a nice dinner out later in the week, or maybe tucked quietly into savings towards something slightly larger down the road. You mention this out loud and your mother nods in agreement, already turning over ideas in her head about how the small windfall might best be used. There is something quietly satisfying about this moment, sitting together at the kitchen table as evening settles fully over the house, counting out the tangible proof of a day spent clearing space and connecting, however briefly, with dozens of strangers and neighbours who pass through your driveway. Each coin represents some small exchange, some brief human connection built around an old teapot or a forgotten toy truck, now condensed into this simple, practical sum spread out before you. Your father wanders in partway through the counting, glancing over your shoulder at the neat piles of coins and bills, offering a small, satisfied nod before heading toward the refrigerator for something cold to drink. The evening feels comfortably ordinary now, the earlier excitement of the sale settling into this quieter, more domestic conclusion. Once the final total is confirmed and recorded, you gather the bills together and slide the coins carefully back into a small jar destined for the bank, the coffee can itself set aside, already earmarked for its return to service at next month's sale, whenever that might happen to be. By evening, the driveway sits bare again, save for a few tyre marks and a folding table leaning against the garage wall waiting to be put away. The quiet that settles over the yard feels different now, earned somehow, the kind of stillness that comes after a day full of small conversations and small transactions. The concrete still holds faint impressions from where the table stood for most of the day, subtle marks that will fade entirely by morning, but for now serve as a quiet reminder of everything that unfolded here over the past several hours. You stand at the edge of the driveway, looking out at the emptiness, feeling a small pang of something that is not quite sadness, more a gentle, wistful acknowledgement that today's small event has now fully concluded. The evening air carries a coolness that was entirely absent during the height of the afternoon, a return to something closer to the temperature of the early morning, though the light now slants from the opposite direction, casting long shadows that stretch across the driveway toward the street. Somewhere nearby, a sprinkler clicks on, its rhythmic hissing filling the quiet in a way that feels comfortingly ordinary after the day's unusual bustle. You notice the single folding table still leaning against the garage wall, apparently overlooked during the earlier cleanup, and you set it properly back inside before it collects any overnight dew. The garage itself looks different now too, noticeably more spacious than it did just yesterday evening. Gaps visible along the shelves where boxes once sat crowded together for years without much thought. The street beyond your driveway has returned to its usual quiet rhythm, porch lights beginning to flicker on one by one as the neighborhood settles into evening, the faint sound of dinner being prepared drifting from open windows further down the block. It feels strange, almost, how quickly a single ordinary street can transform from a small, temporary marketplace back into simply a quiet residential block once more. You linger a moment longer in the driveway, taking in this particular stillness, recognizing that it carries within it the satisfaction of a day well spent rather than the emptiness of simple absence. Every table that stood here earlier, every stranger who paused to examine an old teapot or a forgotten toy, has left some small trace behind, even if nothing remains now but faint tire marks and the lingering scent of cut grass. The garage door creaks shut behind you as you finally step back inside, leaving the driveway to settle fully into its evening quiet, waiting patiently for tomorrow's ordinary rhythms to resume without any trace of today's small, temporary transformation. Inside the house, the rooms feel a little more spacious now, a little lighter. A closet that once felt crowded now has a room to breathe. And somewhere across town, a rocking horse sits in someone else's nursery, a record player spins in someone else's living room, and a chipped teapot holds tea again in a kitchen that is not the one it started in. The things have moved on, but somehow the memories of them linger a little longer in the house they left behind. You walk slowly through the house this evening, noticing these small changes with a kind of quiet satisfaction. Closets that once required careful shuffling to close now shutting easily. Shelves that once sagged under years of accumulated clutter, now sitting comfortably half empty. There is a lightness to the whole house tonight, subtle but unmistakable, the physical result of a single day's worth of careful sorting and letting go. You pause outside the room where the toy box once sat, crowded nearly to overflowing, noting how much easier it will be now for whichever grandchild visits next to find whatever toys remain without wading through years of accumulated excess. The space itself feels different somehow. Not empty exactly, but calmer, easier to move through, easier to breathe within. In the kitchen, the cupboard that once held mismatched dishes stacked precariously against one another now holds only what gets used regularly, each remaining piece sitting with a bit more room around it than it enjoyed just yesterday. You run your hand along the shelf, feeling this small, tangible proof of the day's quiet accomplishment. Somewhere out there tonight, you imagine, that rocking horse is likely sitting quietly in an unfamiliar nursery, waiting for whichever child eventually claims it as their own, ready to carry forward the same simple joy it once provided in your own home years ago. The record player too has surely found its way onto some new shelf or table, prepared to fill someone else's evening with music, just as faithfully as it filled your driveway earlier today. The chipped teapot crosses your mind as well, that small negotiation over a single dime playing back briefly in your memory, and you smile faintly imagining it now steeping tea in some stranger's kitchen, its small imperfection barely noticed by whoever poured their first cup from it this evening. There is something quietly moving about this particular kind of letting go, the recognition that objects carry their stories forward even after they leave the homes that first gave them meaning. Nothing is truly lost in a morning like today. Not really. Things simply continue on, carrying fragments of memory forward into entirely new chapters, settling into new routines, new rooms, new lives that will eventually attach their own stories to these same worn, familiar objects. You settle onto the couch as the evening deepens further outside, the house around you feeling comfortably lighter than it has in years, each empty space a quiet testament to a single, ordinary Saturday spent connecting briefly with neighbours and strangers alike, sending small pieces of your family's history out into the world to continue their journey somewhere new. Just as you thought the sale had truly ended, a single car pulls up outside, later than anyone expected, its headlights catching the last bit of daylight before the sun disappears entirely behind the rooftops across the street. A young man steps out, glancing almost apologetically toward the mostly bare driveway, asking if it is too late to take a look at anything that might still remain. You wave him forward without hesitation, something in his hesitant, hopeful expression reminding you of every other quiet visitor who wandered through earlier in the day. He moves slowly along what little remains, the box of odds and ends, a single lamp with its crooked shade, a stack of picture frames that never quite found their way into anyone else's home. There is no rush in his movements, no urgency, just quiet curiosity about whatever small treasures might still be waiting here at the very end of the day. He lifts the lamp first, tilting it slightly to study the crooked shade, running his fingers along the cord to check that it still works despite its obvious flaws. You mention, almost apologetically, that the shade never quite sat straight no matter how many times you adjusted it, and he simply shrugs, saying he has a small reading corner in his apartment that could use exactly this kind of imperfect, well-worn charm. Next, he turns his attention to the picture frames, sorting through them with the same unhurried patience he brought to the lamp, selecting 2 simple wooden ones and setting aside a third with an ornate gilded edge that catches the last remaining light in a way that seems to genuinely please him. He holds it up, turning it toward you with a small, satisfied smile, as though he has found exactly what he did not know he was looking for. The box of odds and ends draws his attention last, and he sifts through it patiently, pulling out a single tarnished key that catches his eye for reasons neither of you can quite explain, along with a small tangle of costume jewellery that he mentions might make a nice gift for his sister. There is something quietly satisfying about watching someone find genuine interest in items that seemed destined for the curb only an hour earlier. You quote him a modest total, barely worth mentioning in dollars, and he pays without hesitation, thanking you warmly for staying open long enough for him to catch the tail end of the sale. He mentions, almost in passing, that he always seems to find the best sales just as they are ending, when sellers are more willing to let things go simply because the day itself has already run its course. You ask him, out of simple curiosity, how he happened to find your particular street this late in the evening, and he explains that he had been driving home from a friend's house across town, taking the longer route along the residential streets rather than the main road, when your hand-painted sign caught his eye beneath the glow of a street lamp. He almost did not stop, he admits, assuming any sale still visible this late in the day would already be thoroughly picked over. But something about the quiet, patient way the sign still hung from its telephone pole made him curious enough to circle back. You find yourself smiling at this small detail, recognizing in it the same modest magic that carried the sign through its entire day of service. A simple piece of cardboard and paint doing exactly what it was meant to do, right up until the very last hour of daylight. He mentions that he grew up in a similar neighbourhood, one where Saturday garage sales were simply an expected part of the weekend rhythm, and that something about tonight's quiet, winding-down atmosphere reminded him pleasantly of those childhood weekends spent trailing behind his own parents from one driveway to the next. As he continues sorting gently through the remaining box, you find yourselves talking more, the conversation drifting easily the way it so often did throughout the day with other customers, though this particular exchange carries a slightly different quality now, softened by the evening light and the unhurried pace that comes naturally once the bulk of the day's business has already concluded. He mentions his apartment nearby, small but comfortable, still sparsely furnished after a recent move, and you find yourself half wishing you had more furniture left to offer him, something solid and well made to help fill those empty corners he describes. He loads his small collection into the back seat of his car, the lamp resting carefully on its side to avoid further bending its shade, the picture frames wrapped loosely together in an old towel you offer him from a nearby box destined for donation. He thanks you again, genuinely, mentioning that this small collection will mean more to him, settling into his new place, than anything he might have purchased brand new from a store. As he loads his small collection into the back seat of his car, the porch lights up and down the street beginning to flicker on one by one. You find yourself appreciating this final, unplanned exchange, a quiet reminder that even the most ordinary day can hold one last small surprise before it fully concludes. He waves once more before pulling away, his headlights sweeping briefly across your driveway before disappearing around the corner. You stand there a moment longer, listening to his engine fade into the distance, the evening settling more fully now around the empty driveway. There is something almost poetic about this final, unhurried visitor, arriving just as the light faded, taking with him the very last pieces of what the morning had offered so generously to dozens of strangers throughout the day. The remaining box, now considerably lighter, gets carried back toward the garage, its final contents destined either for next month's sale or, more likely, for the trash bins waiting at the curb. But for now you allow yourself a small moment of satisfaction, recognizing that even this final, unplanned transaction carried within it the same quiet warmth that marked every other exchange throughout the day. The street falls quiet again as you make your way back toward the house, the last bit of daylight finally slipping away entirely, replaced by the soft glow of porch lights and the distant hum of evening settling comfortably over the entire neighbourhood, one ordinary Saturday quietly folding itself into memory. You glance once more toward the spot where his car had been parked only minutes earlier, already imagining without quite meaning to that crooked lamp finally finding its proper place in some small unfamiliar reading corner across town, still slightly imperfect, but finally fully appreciated. With the last customer gone and the tables folded away, you retrieve the old push broom from its place beside the garage door and begin sweeping the driveway clean, the bristles catching small bits of dust and stray paper that settle there throughout the long day. It is a simple, familiar task, one that marks the true conclusion of the sale far more definitively than counting money or packing boxes ever could. The broom moves in slow, even strokes across the concrete, gathering small drifts of debris toward the edge of the driveway, where they will eventually be swept into the grass or carried off by tomorrow's breeze. You notice, as you work, the faint outlines where tables once stood, subtle discolorations in the concrete that mark hours of shade cast by folding legs and cardboard boxes throughout the sunniest parts of the afternoon. A stray price tag catches in the bristles, its penciled number long since faded, and you pause to pick it up, turning it over once before letting it drift into your growing pile of debris. Somewhere beneath the accumulated dust lies the ghost of the whole day's activity, tiny fragments of tissue paper that once wrapped fragile dishware, a single button that fell unnoticed from some forgotten coat, small evidence of a morning and afternoon that already feels in this quiet evening light like something from much further in the past. The broom's rhythm settles into something almost meditative, each stroke clearing away a bit more of the day's residue, the driveway slowly returning to its familiar, unremarkable state. You find yourself thinking back over the morning's earliest customers, the woman with her coffee already in hand, the children who lingered so seriously over the toy table, the older man and his quiet story about a handplane lost decades ago during some long-forgotten move. As you sweep past the spot where the record player sat for most of the day, you notice a small scrap of paper caught beneath a stray leaf, the corner of an old record sleeve perhaps, torn loose sometime during the afternoon's steady handling. You pick it up and turn it over, recognizing faintly the label of a song that played on repeat for at least an hour sometime around mid-morning, and for a moment you can almost hear it again, drifting faintly across the driveway the way it did when customers moved unhurriedly from table to table. Further along, near where the clothing rack once stood, you find a single button, small and plain, likely fallen from one of the coats sold earlier in the day. You hold it for a moment in your palm, considering its unremarkable ordinary shape, before adding it to the small collection of debris gathering at the edge of your dustpan. It strikes you, in this quiet moment, how much of a day's worth of activity leaves behind only these smallest, most forgettable traces, fragments too tiny to matter individually, but somehow adding up, together, to real evidence of a life fully lived through these hours. Your mother steps outside briefly, offering to help, and the two of you finish the remaining stretch together, moving in comfortable silence broken only by the soft scrape of bristles against concrete and the occasional distant bark of a neighborhood dog settling in for the evening. There is something quietly companionable about this final shared task. No words really necessary between you, both of you simply grateful for the day's success and ready now for its natural conclusion. She mentions, as you sweep together near the garage entrance, that this particular part of cleanup always feels the most satisfying to her, more so even than counting the money afterward. There is something almost ceremonial about it, she says, watching the driveway slowly return to its ordinary emptiness, proof that the day's work has been properly and fully completed. You nod in agreement, recognizing the same quiet satisfaction in your own chest as the dust and debris steadily gather into a single, manageable pile near the curb. Once the driveway sits fully clear, you lean the broom back against the garage wall, taking a final look at the space that held so much activity just hours earlier. It is remarkable, you think, how thoroughly a driveway can return to its ordinary self once the tables come down and the dust gets swept away, no lingering trace remaining except in memory. The evening air has cooled considerably now, carrying with it the first hints of nighttime dampness that will settle into dew by morning. Somewhere down the street, a porch light flickers on, followed shortly by another. The whole neighbourhood gradually settling into its familiar evening rhythm, utterly unaware, perhaps, of just how much quiet commerce and connection unfolded here throughout the day. You take one last look at the clean, empty driveway before heading back inside, the broom resting quietly against the garage wall, ready for whatever ordinary task might call for it next, its role in today's small event now fully and completely finished. Somewhere behind you, the porch door creaks softly as your mother steps back inside ahead of you, and you linger just a moment longer, letting the day's quiet conclusion settle fully around you before finally following her in. As dusk settles fully over the street, a neighbour from 2 doors down wanders over, drawn less by any remaining merchandise and more by simple curiosity about how your day compared to her own sale held just last month. She leans against the porch railing, a light cardigan pulled around her shoulders against the evening's growing chill, ready to trade small stories about the particular strangers and small negotiations that seem to define every garage sale morning in this neighbourhood. You settle onto the porch steps together, the two of you comparing notes with the easy familiarity of women who have shared this particular ritual many times before. She mentions her own early morning bargain hunters, describing a woman remarkably similar to the one who moved so methodically through your own tables earlier, wondering aloud whether it might have been the very same customer making her rounds through the whole neighbourhood. The conversation drifts naturally from one small anecdote to another, comparing which items sold quickly and which lingered stubbornly despite repeated price reductions. She laughs, recalling her own crooked lamp from last month's sale, one that never did sell despite 3 separate price cuts, eventually ending up donated quietly to a local charity rather than facing the indignity of the curb. You share your own stories in return, the older man and his hand plane, the young couple who deliberated so seriously over the rocking horse before finally deciding it belonged in their nursery. She nods along, recognizing these particular rhythms immediately, the same small human dramas playing out slightly differently on every driveway, but somehow feeling universally familiar regardless of whose sale hosted them. She asks eventually whether you had any trouble with the coffee can this time, mentioning her own mild anxiety about leaving it unattended even briefly last month, when a brief lull in customers had left her worrying that someone might wander off with the whole thing tucked under an arm. You reassure her that nothing of the sort happened today, that if anything, people seemed almost eager to round up their payments rather than shortchange you even slightly, a small but reassuring reminder of the quiet trust that seems to govern these particular mornings. The two of you talk for a while about the neighbourhood itself, how it has changed slightly over the years, new families moving in here and there, older neighbours eventually moving on to smaller homes or nearby retirement communities, though the tradition of the occasional Saturday garage sale seems to persist regardless of exactly who happens to be living on the street at any given time. There is something comforting in this continuity, she mentions, the recognition that whatever else changes, certain small rituals like this one continue quietly on, passed down informally from one household to the next, simply through example and habit. You mention the young man who arrived just as the light was fading, the crooked lamp finally finding a home after being passed over all day, and she smiles at this, saying she always finds a particular kind of satisfaction in these last-minute sales, the sense that even the most overlooked items eventually find someone willing to appreciate them, if only the day lasts long enough. The evening deepens further as you talk, porch lights flickering on across the street one by one, marking the neighbourhood's gradual settling into nighttime quiet. Your conversation slows naturally, comfortable pauses stretching between topics, neither of you feeling any particular urgency to fill every silence with words. She mentions eventually that she is already considering another sale herself in a few months, once she's had time to accumulate enough new items worth clearing out again. You laugh, recognizing the particular cycle that seems to govern households like yours, a steady rhythm of accumulation and release that never quite fully stops, each garage sale simply marking one small pause in an otherwise continuous process. As she rises to head back toward her own house, she offers a final small comment about how pleasant it always feels, comparing notes like this, recognizing that these small, ordinary Saturday events carry within them more connection than anyone might initially expect. You agree completely, watching her disappear back down the sidewalk toward her own porch light, the conversation settling comfortably into memory alongside everything else the day provided. The street falls quiet again once she is gone, leaving you alone on your own porch steps, surrounded by the settling stillness of evening, the day's small commerce and quiet neighbourhood connection now fully complete, waiting patiently to be recalled again whenever the next sale eventually comes around. You linger a while longer, watching the last bit of colour fade entirely from the sky, feeling the particular contentment that comes from a day spent not just clearing space in your own garage, but reaffirming in small quiet ways the simple bonds that hold a neighbourhood like this one gently together. Sitting alone on the porch steps now, you feel the day's first truly cool breeze drift across the yard, carrying with it the scent of freshly cut grass mixed faintly with the last lingering traces of cardboard and dust that clung to the driveway for most of the afternoon. It is the kind of breeze that signals evening has fully arrived, the mild warmth of the day finally giving way to something gentler, quieter, more reflective. You lean back slightly, resting your elbows against the step behind you, watching the sky deepen from its earlier orange and pink hues into something closer to a soft, dusky blue. Somewhere overhead, the first faint stars begin to emerge, barely visible yet against the day's fading light, but present nonetheless, quiet reminders that the day is transitioning fully now into night. The breeze stirs gently through the trees lining the street, leaves rustling softly in a way that feels distinctly different from the busier sounds of earlier in the day. No more car doors slamming, no more children's excited voices calling out over the toy table, just this simple, natural movement of air through branches settling in for the evening. You think back over the day's small moments once more, not with any particular urgency to remember everything precisely, but simply allowing your mind to drift comfortably over whatever details happen to surface. The smell of cardboard boxes opened in the early morning light, the soft clink of coins dropping into the coffee can, the particular satisfaction of watching strangers discover small joy in objects your own family had long since stopped noticing. A dog barks somewhere down the street, followed by the quiet murmur of a screen door opening and closing, small ordinary sounds that seem to belong distinctly to this particular hour, marking the neighbourhood's gradual settling into its nighttime rhythm. You breathe in deeply, letting the cool evening air fill your lungs, feeling the last bit of the day's warmth finally releasing from your shoulders. The porch light behind you casts a soft, warm glow across the steps, just enough to illuminate your hands resting in your lap, while everything beyond its modest reach settles gradually into deeper shadow. You notice, almost absently, a few remaining crumbs from an afternoon snack scattered near your feet, evidence of the small, unremarkable moments that filled the gaps between customers throughout the busier hours of the day. Somewhere in the distance, a car passes slowly along a cross street, its headlights briefly sweeping across the neighbouring rooftops before disappearing entirely, leaving the evening quieter still in its wake. You think of the young man who left just a little while ago, wondering idly whether he has made it home yet, whether the crooked lamp is already sitting in that small reading corner he mentioned, casting its familiar tilted light across some unfamiliar apartment for the very first time tonight. There is something quietly satisfying about sitting here now, alone with your thoughts, the driveway behind you completely empty and swept clean, the whole elaborate arrangement of tables and boxes and hand-painted signs now entirely disassembled and returned to their ordinary places. The day accomplished exactly what it set out to do, clearing space, connecting briefly with neighbours and strangers, turning forgotten objects into small, welcome sums of cash, and, more importantly, into new beginnings for whoever now owns them. The breeze picks up slightly, cool enough now to raise goosebumps along your arms, and you consider heading back inside soon, though something about this particular moment feels worth lingering in just a little longer. The stars grow steadily more visible overhead, the sky shifting from dusky blue into something closer to full darkness, marking the true and complete end of today's small, ordinary event. You pull your sweater a little more snugly around your shoulders, savouring this last quiet stretch of evening before the chill fully sets in, listening to the soft rustle of leaves overhead, mixing with the distant, comforting hum of a neighbourhood slowly settling into its nighttime rest. It feels, in this particular moment, as though the whole day has folded itself neatly into this single peaceful pause, everything that happened earlier now simply part of the quiet, accumulated history of this ordinary street. You take one last look toward the street, quiet now, porch lights glowing steadily up and down the block, and feel a small, contented sense of closure settle over you. The kind that comes only after a long day spent in genuine, unhurried connection with your own neighbourhood and the strangers who passed briefly through it. Slowly, reluctantly, you rise from the steps, taking one final breath of the cool evening air before turning back toward the warm, waiting light of the house behind you. Later that night, tucked comfortably into bed, you find your mind still drifting gently back over the day's small moments, replaying them one by one with the same unhurried patience that marked the sale itself. The woman with her coffee arriving before the tables were even fully set, the children sorting seriously through the toy table, the quiet negotiation over a chipped teapot that settled, in the end, for just 15 cents less than its original price. The house around you has settled fully into its nighttime quiet now. The faint hum of the refrigerator downstairs, the only sound accompanying your thoughts as you lie there, comfortable and pleasantly tired from a day spent almost entirely on your feet. You think about the rocking horse, likely already settled into some unfamiliar nursery, waiting patiently for whichever child claims it as their own tomorrow morning. You think about the record player, still sitting quietly in someone else's living room now, ready to fill their evening with the same familiar music that filled your driveway just hours earlier. There is something deeply satisfying about this particular kind of tiredness, not the frantic exhaustion of a difficult day, but the calm, settled fatigue that comes from hours spent in simple, honest exchange with neighbours and strangers alike. You think about the coffee can, now emptied and rinsed, resting quietly on a shelf in the kitchen, ready for its next appearance whenever another sale eventually comes around. Your mind drifts toward the small stories exchanged throughout the day, the older man's quiet reflection on his father's workshop, the young couple deliberating so carefully over whether the rocking horse would truly fit in their still unfinished nursery. Each of these small moments feels in this quiet nighttime reflection like something worth holding on to a little longer, proof that even an ordinary Saturday can hold within it dozens of small, meaningful human connections. You picture too the young man who arrived just as the light was fading, imagining him now settling into his apartment, the crooked lamp finally plugged in and switched on, casting its familiar tilted glow across whatever book he might be reading in that small corner he described so fondly. There is something quietly comforting in imagining these objects continuing on in their new homes tonight, each one carrying forward some small piece of the life they once lived inside your own house, now beginning entirely new chapters somewhere else across town. You shift slightly beneath your blankets, feeling the day's remaining tension finally releasing fully from your shoulders, your breathing slowing into something steadier, calmer, more ready for sleep. Outside your window, the neighbourhood has grown fully quiet now, porch lights extinguished one by one as households settle into their own nighttime routines, the whole street resting peacefully after its own small, shared participation in today's modest event. Somewhere in your mind, the faint echo of the record player's crackling music drifts back, mixing softly with the memory of the lemonade stand's cheerful, uneven sign, and the quiet murmur of neighbours comparing notes on the porch steps just an hour or so earlier. These small fragments layer gently over one another, forming something that feels, in this drowsy, half-waking state, less like a single day and more like a small, complete world unto itself, contained entirely within these last 24 hours. You think, one final time, about the empty driveway waiting patiently outside, swept clean and ready for tomorrow's ordinary Sunday routines, no trace remaining of the tables and boxes and hand-painted signs that transformed it so completely for just a few hours. It is remarkable, you think sleepily, how thoroughly an ordinary space can hold such temporary meaningful purpose, then return so completely to its usual quiet function once the day concludes. Your eyes grow heavier now, the day's accumulated tiredness finally overtaking your drifting thoughts, and you let yourself sink fully into the comfort of your bed, the memory of the day's small exchanges settling comfortably alongside you as you finally drift towards sleep, carried gently by the quiet, ordinary satisfaction of a Saturday well spent among neighbours, strangers, and the simple, forgotten treasures that once filled your garage. So that was a 1960s American garage sale, from the quiet work of a Friday evening to the last customer catching the light just before it faded. A folding table on uneven concrete, a coffee can holding an entire morning's worth of trust. A hand-painted sign nailed loosely to a telephone pole, believing in itself enough to pull strangers up a driveway. There was nothing extraordinary about any of it, and that is exactly the point. A woman running her fingers along a seam the way her mother taught her. A father grumbling about his back while he carried out one more table. Neighbours in bathrobes wandering over just to talk about nothing at all. These were not people trying to be remembered. They were simply spending a Saturday the way Saturdays were spent, taking care of small things, making a little room, saying hello to whoever happened to walk by. There is a quiet dignity in that, in dusting off an old teapot and letting it go for a dime, in folding a stranger's forgotten coat and hoping it keeps someone warm this winter, in sweeping a driveway clean at the end of a long day, simply because the day deserved that kind of care. Maybe that is something worth carrying forward tonight. Not the folding tables or the coffee cans, but the pace of it. The willingness to stand still for a moment and talk to a neighbour. The patience to let an old object tell its story before deciding whether to keep it or let it go. History's not always dramatic. Sometimes it is a driveway, and a record player, and someone down the street who knows your name, and that has always been enough. So let the evening settle around you now, the way it settled around that quiet street so long ago. The tables are folded, the porch lights are on, and everything, for tonight is exactly where it belongs. Good night.